Welcome to another broadcast of Truth Be Told, where we believe in experience becomes truth. I'm your host, and joining me now in studio, your other host, we have Captain Ron. What better way to spend a Friday with someone that loves to talk about paranormal, UFOs, aliens, extraterrestrials, shadow people, Bigfoot, mysterious creatures, and much more. Yes, we have Rosemary Guiley, who has written over 60 books, and with her current work focusing on interdimensional entities' contact experiences, problem haunting, spirit, and entity attachments. But today we're going to broaden that, and we're going to talk about pretty much everything we can think of and have a great conversation with this metaphysical and paranormal expert. And I want to touch on her last book that was published last year in 2016 called Demon Haunted, True Stories from the John Saffis Vault. So please welcome back on Truth Be Told, where we believe in experience becomes truth, Rosemary Guiley. Rosemary's back.
Awesome.
I'm back, baby.
That's right. And we are so happy you're back. You are still gorgeous and still talented and writing those books. We love it.
I'm going to write till the very end.
That's right. I was just telling Captain Ron during the intro, I was like, she must have like ambidextrous. She just has pens in both hands writing.
60
People
books, that's
ask
amazing.
me how I do it, and my true answer is I don't know and I don't want to know because I want to wreck the magic.
That's right. Yeah. You don't want to wreck anything like that.
And there's such a diversity of topics. It's not like you wrote 60 books on one topic that you happen to be, knowledgeable in. This is just a wide range of anything that we're into. We're into every one of these books we could have you on and do a talk about.
Every single one. Well, okay, let's get right into it. So, real quick, you've been here before, but we've had a lot newer audience that have joined us, and we want to thank them for that. But explain a little bit about your background of what got you into the paranormal and metaphysical work that you do.
I've been interested since I was a kid, and I think a lot of the people who wind up as researchers, investigators, and writers in the fields of the unknown start out that way. It's an early interest. I was a voracious reader. I loved everything mysterious. I loved astronomy, space travel, ghosts, horror, hauntings. And on top of that, there were psychic experiences in my family. My mom had a lot of them, and when I was a kid, I had some. I think that most children do. And as children get older, it kind of fades into the background as they get, more used to the outer world.
Right. Because
the outer world really doesn't approve of all of these things. And so for me, however, I was really curious about the how and why. And as I got older and I learned that it's a very uneven playing field when it comes to paranormal experience. I wanted to know why. Why doesn't everybody see a ghost? Why doesn't everybody have contact with angels or ETs? And why were some people so disapproving and disbelieving? And others on the other end of the spectrum were having very frequent experiences that convinced them that they were part of what they considered to be normal reality. So those early interests really propelled a lot of my personal study, which then became my professional work.
And we were talking, you remind us a lot of Linda Moulton Howe, who you really go deep into your investigations of every topic that you do your research on.
I do. I believe in that it's important to get out there and do field work and to do as much original as you can. You can't always, you have to do a lot of armchair research too.
Right.
So it's been a combination of things over the years, and I built up a very big network of fellow researchers and sources, people I can call on when I'm digging into something. But you have to get out, and because my work is oriented a lot to the subjective experience, you have to get out and interview experiencers.
So how do you choose your book? Like Captain Ron was saying, we're this one's a Bigfoot, this one's ET, this one's ghost, this one's
we're across the whole.
So what mindset are you in when you start picking the topics to write about?
Well, I'm of a mind that books choose you, and I think a lot of writers would say that.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it comes from just the ongoing work that I do, because I've been doing this full time since 1983.
Wow.
So I'm constantly in a flow of information and thought and questioning and a creative process in all of these areas that I'm interested in. I'm also literally interested in all of these areas. They're all interconnected. And so I'm often propelled by my own quest for knowledge. Questions come up either through my investigations or what people start asking me, or I become curious about something myself, and that propels an investigation. But I also like to think that there's something else at work, and that you get your ideas. There's outside stimulus, from spirit, I guess you would say, with a capital S, that we are guided to inquire about certain things.
Mm-hmm.
People have asked me, if I channel, do I sit down and channel entities? And I don't. I have done mediumistic work, and I do psychic readings, but when I research and write, it's very much me. It's my own elbow grease.
Right.
At the same time, I've always believed that anything artistic and creative, no matter what it is always getting a boost from the spirit planes. So that's automatically part of the process. And for some people, it's going to be more dramatic, like giving themselves over to that, sitting down like Ruth Montgomery did. She would sit down at the keyboard and contact her spirit guide group and say, okay, what do you want to talk about today? And for me, it's not that way. I don't feel that entities tell me what to write. Or hand me information, but yet when I embark on an avenue of research, it's not surprising to me that doors start opening up.
Right.
What's so interesting about this, we just did a show on Edgar Cayce,
right,
and he, tapped into the Akashic record, and he supposedly, it almost sounds like that's what you're doing. Like you said that, you start flowing and these ideas come to you, and it seems like you're almost doing that same thing, sort of. Not as much as he is, but
or maybe so.
Well, yeah, maybe so.
I think it's the same thing. It's just a different process for different people.
Yeah.
And I've meditated for quite a few years, almost daily. It's hard to do when you travel.
Right.
But meditation sets up a connection to things too that I think augments this flow of inspiration and ideas and a very subtle guidance, I would say, for what to do. So I respect people who say, they have stories to tell. Where I'm just reading a book now, a woman who feels that aliens came to visit her and to give her very specific information, and she was supposed to write such and such a book, and this is supposed to be the material in it. And who's to say that this isn't just as legitimate a process as me getting the material ideas that I feel are my own? And who's to?
Sorry, we got a little feedback there, but so go ahead and keep going.
So, what I'm saying, bottom line, is the creative process about how you get your ideas and go about your research. It's different for everyone.
Right.
And I've always felt very connected to the spiritual planes. But yes, when I write, I feel it's me doing the writing, not some other agency. I don't try and vacate myself and allow something else to speak through me. Yet at the same time, it is as I said, anything creative is a spirit assisted process. I feel that I've had other lives as a writer, and so this is like any skill, it builds up over lifetimes. And I like to make the comment that I think I came out of the womb with a manuscript in the
I believe it. I mean, look how prolific you are. It's ridiculous.
I've been writing as long as I can remember.
My gosh.
Yeah, is each topic kind of like a child to you? You love them all, but do you relate to one more than the other?
It gets very hard to pick favorites. because I am so intrigued by all of the topics that I do. I do have some favorites, however. Angels have always been a favorite of mine. I find angelologies to be intriguing and very complex, and the angelic realm to be one of great mystery. And I also love vampires for the same reason. They're very complex. They have an incredible body of folklore to them worldwide. And they also are a never-ending mystery.
Well, of course. No, go ahead.
Well, I'll say let's jump in now and
Yes.
get into some of the meat of this, because I could ask you 1,000 questions, because each one of these topics interests me as well. I'd like you, if you could please speak a little bit about this experiencer.org organization that you're involved in, because I think this is a brilliant idea, and I'll let you tell our audience what this is about.
It's an amazing effort and organization. Yes, I've been involved for about 2 years now. Experiencer.org is the website, and the organization is the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. And actually, it includes more than ETs, but it started out as primarily focused on ETs. And it's been in existence for not quite 4 years. I was contacted by the principal founder, Ray Hernandez, a couple of years ago, and invited to be on the board and to participate in it. What FREE has done is the world's largest survey of experiencers ever undertaken. Now, previous studies, I mean, let's face it, this is an underfunded area,
Right.
Absolutely.
Money for interviewing people about their extraordinary experiences just doesn't exist. So we can't fault previous studies for being small, taking small samples. And most of them have been done by individual researchers and maybe involved 100 or a couple hundred people, usually in a very narrow focus, like abductions, for example. And this, however, was global. It involved, to date, we have a little over 3,000 respondents from over 60 countries, most of them in the West, of course, the US, the UK, Australia, Canada would be the leaders. But 63 people from 63 countries have answered our 600 questions about their extraordinary experiences. And the data pool that has come out of that is quite extensive. We're still analyzing it. We have a statistician working on it now. We've published some preliminary findings, but there's a lot more coming out of it. One of the salient things that has come out of this is that of all the people who report experiences, and sometimes people don't know what they're encountering. They don't know whether to call it an ET, or we get energy being a lot, or higher being. A lot of these contact experiences sort of fall between the cracks in terms of how the media have defined them. But overwhelmingly, the evidence shows positive experiences, not negative ones. And when you think about just the ET arena alone, consider how the media have conditioned us to anticipate and expect negative contact experiences from ETs. They're here to conquer us, eat us, wipe us out, colonize us, whatever, but it's not good for us.
Right.
And what the actual experiencers are telling us is that it's on the opposite end of the spectrum. It's mind expanding. It's got an intense spiritual component to it. People have still reported unpleasant abductions. I mean, let's not get that wrong. There's a spectrum of the experiencer contact arena, part of that spectrum that has had horrific abduction experiences, because there are negative beings out there. This is not Pollyanna, rose-colored glasses sort of thing.
Now,
but it was a surprising finding that so many people reported positive experiences.
It must be fun seeing the similarities between these accounts too, because you'd start to see patterns. You'd start to see, things emerge from these different, questionnaire answers.
Right. Right.
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. And that's one thing that we're analyzing now is trying to get a better handle on the patterns. But just looking at some of the breakdowns, these were multiple choice questions. We did have a phase 3 where we gave people the opportunity to write details about their experiences, and we're still studying that as well. But just looking at the multiple answer response to the 600 questions, we can see certain patterns emerging. And one of the most significant that I think, and I have been talking about this now since the data came out just a little over a year ago, is that a substantial portion of the positive experiencers are undergoing transformations that are identical to what is described in yogic literature for Kundalini awakenings.
Well, that's fascinating.
These would be psycho-spiritual, physical changes that they feel are happening to them simply as a result of contact. Now, this picture, is still emerging from the data, but to me, this is absolutely astounding because I do believe that consciousness of humanity is expanding and that we are on the threshold, if not over the threshold, of what I call transdimensional Earth. That is an Earth that is our reality is starting to bleed more into parallel realities, and human beings of the future are going to be very different than the ones that are here now, both physically and consciousness-wise. And in yoga, the Kundalini awakening is something that is a spiritual study over a long period of time. You cultivate this energy, you cultivate it to come into the body and spiritualize all the centers of the body. And ideally, it needs to be managed so that you don't have blowout experiences that become very hard to integrate, for example. Well, how are contactees handling this? We have no answers now. All we can see from just the preliminary data findings are the symptoms, the results, and what people are talking about. But how are people integrating these things? So they're talking about being more psychic suddenly, about having the ability to be telepathic and clairvoyant and be cognitive about a lot of things. They feel healing energy coming through their body. They feel like their nervous systems have been rewired. It takes spiritual grounding to integrate these things. And so the implications for this kind of widespread awakening are quite profound.
So I'm gonna ask this question because recently we had a gentleman talking about the reptilians, and I mean his thought, and it got very negative about pretty much we might as well they're doing mind control. They've taken over our governments and our media, and there's other than us building a more of a positive mindset and our spirituality, there's really no hope for us. And I mean, my gut told me that's not correct, but I want to know your thoughts.
Hold on, Tony. Let me pile on exactly to your question. Just I'm sure you're familiar also with like David Jacobs and his research. He also says the same thing about the Greys, that how he studied thousands of people with the hypnosis and their experience, and how I think it's about creating babies and hybrids.
Oh, right. And that's what he also said about creating hybrids and that are among us now. In your research, and you said that there's good ones and bad ones. So could you tell our audience maybe some of the extraterrestrials that are there to help us in the process of, because as human beings we make a lot of mistakes. I mean, we're like toddlers that keep touching
Tony
the stove.
Specifically, by the way.
That's right. We keep touching that hot stove over and over. But can you give us some good news when it comes to some of the types of species that actually are helping us?
Well, here's the thing about helping us, and this might be a natural tendency of human beings, because when we look to other intelligent races, we tend to polarize them. They're either good in their going to help us out, or
Right.
they're bad and they're going to do us in. And there's very little in between.
Right.
And that seems to be human nature. And of course, the media have conditioned us that way as well. Well, people in our survey did talk about feeling that they were getting helpful information. We have a small number of people who say they got scientific or technical downloads, or that they were healed, or that they were given information about the Earth's future.
Mm-hmm.
But the majority of them said, we don't know why they're here, because they don't tell us. They don't say where they're from or why they're here, why they picked me. But there is something about the act of contact itself that is the catalyst, that is the trigger for these other changes. So simply the act of contact with a non-human intelligent being seems to do something to people. So if they're not here to save us from ourselves, or warn us of catastrophes, or give us science and technology, or cook us, or whatever, then what are they doing?
Right.
And that's a question that I think we need to look more closely at, and maybe the data will illuminate that more. But there does seem to be something significant about just having the contact experience. And what people report from that is that the act of contact, the experience of contact, is consciousness expanding. It's almost like a mystical experience that many people have a hard time then describing or putting into words.
Mm-hmm.
There's an intense spiritual component to it that makes people feel connected to something greater than themselves. For some people, it influences their spiritual beliefs. And by the way, overwhelmingly, our respondents said that they were more spiritual and less religious, and that it's no longer important to go to church.
But don't you think
Interesting.
a lot of religious organizations, and just recently the Catholic Church, even said something about extraterrestrials, or at least life in the outer space, that they're afraid that it would change the way we would look at religion if we find out for sure that there are aliens out there.
Absolutely, there's no doubt in my mind that the effects on religion would be profound, perhaps even catastrophic.
Right.
And all kinds of things could shift. And if the government is watching us, and there are people who say that we are being watched and monitored, and other people who say the government has more things to worry about than what people think about aliens.
Mm-hmm.
But I would think that there would be some interest in monitoring the mass social reaction to whether or not aliens are present here on the Earth. And we have, all of these enticing shows that talk about aliens already being here, and people who say they've had contact with them.
Right.
People who say they're hybrids because they've interbred with them. But it's like belief in the afterlife. People believe in the afterlife, but they don't really, if you know what I mean. It's
Right.
like if you tried to present proof of the afterlife to people, and as individuals have done in the past, you would find a massive disconnect. And it's the same thing with aliens. We like to wonder about it and think about it, and maybe we intellectually believe that this might happen, but it's vastly different than being confronted with the actual presence of alien beings en masse. So that's a pretty big gulf between those two things.
Right.
But if I were organized religion, I would be very concerned about the shift in people's spiritual values as a result of having contact with something that is not human.
I'm going to ask you this because you've also written about mysterious creatures, and I always find it fascinating that, like Bigfoot and a lot of Loch Ness Monster and so many different creatures from all around the world, we've heard the myths, and few people have spotted, but we've never really had evidence. Do you feel a lot of the mysterious creatures might be some type of alien life form?
I think they're jinn. And
you
the deeper I go into the jinn, the more I think they account for things. They certainly have their footprints and everything.
Well,
whether or
people
not
certainly see them on gin. I know that.
Yeah, no, yeah, they drink gin. They might see a little bit
That's
more.
right.
Yeah, but can you explain a little what gin is for a lot of people out there that really don't know what that is?
Well, the simplest answer is the jinn are what people associate with the genie in the bottle. And the term genie is a corruption of jinn, which means the hidden ones. And they are a supernaturally superior race of beings who, by folklore accounts, and I believe that folklore has a basis in reality, as does mythology, occupied this planet before we did, and for various reasons got pushed out, i.e. into a parallel reality as human beings took over. And they are shapeshifters. They have no known physical form, but they have the capability of finding their way into our world. And even though not all of them dislike us, the ones who come here the most often seem to dislike us a lot. And their interactions with us range from being annoying little tricksters to out and out supernatural terrorists. Now, people think that because most of the lore about them is Middle Eastern and the term jinn is Arabic, that isn't of consequence or concern to us here in the West because they're over there in the Middle East. And that is the most fallacious thinking that you can apply to anything that is not physical. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about angels or fairies or trolls or dogmen or jinn or whatever. They can be anywhere on the planet. And how human beings have organized themselves by race, culture, country, etc., is of no concern to them. They just operate everywhere and often by different names. Well, I started investigating the jinn quite some time ago as an outgrowth of my interest in shadow people. And the deeper I went into jinn territory, the more I saw them in everything that we do. And in fact, there are people, researchers, who believe that they account for everything, which is one big bull to swallow. It would be like saying, what? You mean there's just us and the jinn and maybe the angels and that's it?
Mm-hmm.
Not that there are not beings from other planets. I'm not ruling that out. I mean, certainly there are life forms on other planets. I'm talking about us here in our multiverse, our Earth with the parallel dimensions attached to Earth. And yet I do see their presence, their footprints, their handiwork in all of our experiences. And mysterious creatures is typical jinn behavior because they like to take forms that upset people or confound people and get us going. They like to see us be the dog chasing the tail a lot. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're very destructive. They can possess people. They can cause illness, bad luck, serious forms of possession. They can be involved in the shedding of blood because they do like the life force. So they play a lot of roles on the planet.
I want to ask you this because there's one thing for me, just, I'm trying to just everyday folk, just that country boy from Kansas. But when you said that we, the evolution of man, the more we kind of push them out with their type of their abilities, how would man be able to push them out?
Well, the same thing is said of the fairies, and actually I think the fairies are forms taken by jinn. The fairies lost out to us too, and in fairy lore, the fairies had domination, and then human beings arrived, and they were physically stronger, and they started pushing the little folk out into more and more desolate areas, and finally they went underground, which is an excellent explanation for a parallel dimension. Well, the same thing happened to the jinn. The jinn existed in mythology and lore before Islam, and one of the creation stories is that they have no form, so they were literally the winds or like the winds, and they dominated the planet and created all the weather conditions. And when God decided to create people, and people started inhabiting the planet, it gradually pushed them literally into the ground. And they were punished because they were very arrogant. So they went underground, just like the fairies, and they went into desolate areas. That's some of the stories. They were absorbed into Islam, and according to that creation story, when God decided to create human beings, he wanted angels to bow down to Adam, and the angels complied, but the jinn did not. Iblis, the leader of the jinn, was of the opinion that human beings were inferior to the jinn, and he wasn't about to bow down to anything inferior. So God cast them out. So they get cast out of physical reality into another reality. But they begged off a chance to make their case with God that human beings were indeed inferior, and so they were granted the capability of access. So there are some parallels between the evil jinn and the demons who fall from grace and come to earth and are condemned to earth and roam around and torment people. Well, I do believe in the jinn as real entities. They're as real as demons. Demons may be a form taken by jinn. They're as real as ETs. They're as real as angels. Anything else that's out there. I've had many encounters with them. When I found their tracks into the ET arena, it was not something that I anticipated, something I went deliberately looking for, but I was researching shadow people, and I wanted to get to the bottom of what shadow people are. And so I started collecting cases, and hundreds of cases. And I noticed that a lot of people would volunteer that they were also ET experiencers and especially abductees. And I thought, well, that's really interesting, because you don't see that with ghost people or dogmen people or angel people. You know, they don't volunteer this connection that they've got with ETs. But it was very high with the shadow people, and I think shadow people are jinn.
Well, Ellen,
go ahead.
Rosemary, we're going to take a quick break. We got to do a sponsor real quick. But this, if you're fascinated as we are, this is a show you're going to want to come back for after this break. But we're speaking with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, and we've been talking about UFOs and jinn and vampires. But when we come back, I want to talk more about some vampires and some demons. Not just talking about Captain Ron, but we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Truth Be Told, and I'm Tony Sweet. We have Captain Ron here, and we're going to be right back after this message. You suffer from anxiety, from depression, maybe even chronic pain? Well, listen up. Truth Be Told is going to tell you about a breakthrough program built on over 100 years of therapies used in America's returning veterans to help you successfully overcome PTSD, anxiety attacks, pain, and depression. The secret proven in study after study. Music therapy. The effects of music are nothing short of amazing. From strokes to PTSD, music has been shown to improve the quality of life. Now, one of the latest music therapy programs being used in America's veteran hospitals can be yours to experience for free at home and to help your own anxiety attacks, pain, and depression. Or just relax after a hard day. It's called Whole Tones. It takes music therapy to a new level. This revolutionary program makes use of specifically designed frequencies that have been shown to stimulate your body's natural healing power down to a cellular level. If it works for battle-scarred vets, can it work for you? Well, experience it for yourself for free at sweetwholetones.com. Like Tony Sweet, that's SWEET. Go to sweetwholetones.com. Now enjoy the show.
And we are back on Truth Be Told. I am, of course, Captain Ron with Tony Sweet. We are very, very happy to have Rosemary Ellen Guiley with us today, and she's been covering a whole spectrum of different entities today. And I'd like to pick it up right there and just one more time drill down on this, since you're so versed in these different disciplines. Rosemary, could you kind of speak to... We have angels, we have jinn, we have shadow people, we have spirits, we have ghosts, we have aliens. You've touched on all of those. Do you think that this is different phenomenon that are truly distinct, or do you think it's possible they're related? Do you think it's just different ways people describe the same phenomenon just in their thing? Like you said that the jinn was in an Arabic way. Maybe somebody from America would call it a spirit or a ghost. How do you stand on that?
Well, there's very blurry boundaries, that's for sure. I mean, let's just take the vampire, for example. What's the definition of a vampire? Well, broadest possible hit the broadside of a barn definition would be an entity, living or dead or non-human, that takes the life force. Mm-hmm. And yet we think of vampires as blood drinkers, and that they're dead people who escape the grave and come back and drink the blood of the living. That's one of the Eastern European models. But when you look at vampiric beings in mythologies around the world, vampires are all over the place. They might not drink blood. They might take something else from the living. They can be living people. They can be people who were dead, who come back from being dead. They can be non-human entities. They can be nightmare entities and cause terrible nightmares. They can be disease beings, and vampires have been associated with epidemics. So there's quite a range of vampires, and culture to culture, they all have their own definitions and their own terminologies, and yet, bottom line, they're all vampires. So there's often very little separating a lot of these entities, that the characteristics and behavior patterns and how people have encountered them, interacted with them, and been affected by them are very similar, culture to culture, name to name. And so are we really dealing with, for example, local versions of one big Oz behind the curtain? I don't know. For example, take the jinn. I can certainly see how the jinn can be all of the things that we encounter. And I think that if they do have motives to interact with people and they are shapeshifters, then of course they would assume forms that we're familiar with as a way of disguising themselves. And maybe they might do some variations like mysterious creatures. If they account for everything, well, then we seriously have to reorient our view of our corner of the multiverse. And I've talked to experts on the jinn who say, look, Rosemary, it's us, the angels, and jinn, and that's it. And centuries ago, the jinn were fairies and demons and trolls, and now they've figured out that people like aliens from outer space, so they're aliens from outer space.
And Bigfoot and all that too?
Pardon me?
Do you think Bigfoot and all of those things could be them playing around?
It's possible. The research that I've been doing on Sasquatch, and by the way, they don't like to be called Bigfoot. They kind of.
I apologize to all the
you know how many
Bigfoot listeners
how many
out
Bigfoot
there.
or Sasquatch you pissed off?
Maybe they like our show.
Big head or something, But I don't know about them because I am convinced that Sasquatch are intelligent beings that share the planet with us and occupy one of these parallel realities. So my feeling right now about the jinn is that they're involved in these experiences, but I have not come across evidence that convinces me that they are all of those things. But the more that I learn about them and examine other cases from the standpoint of jinn, you can very easily make a case for demons to be jinn.
Right.
And so how do we know? We don't, because the jinn don't sit down for interviews. They don't tell us what we're up to. And they're not all of a single mind and agenda. They're not gingerbread soldiers marching around to the same beat. They're as mixed in their motives and interests as people are. So it makes for a very complex situation. I think they meddle around in the ET arena. My personal opinion is I think we've been visited by other beings from other worlds, but most of our experiences that we call ET are just ultra-terrestrial. They're coming from other realities tied to the planet.
So
And I'm not the first person to think this, by the way. And I do want to mention one name because I think it's very important, because ufology has blinders on a lot, not that other fields don't, but certain sort of tunnel vision concepts take hold in ufology, and they're very hard to expand beyond. Well, back in the 1970s, Gordon Creighton, who's no longer with us, who was the editor and publisher of Flying Saucer Review in England, he knew a lot about the jinn. And he wrote in the Flying Saucer Review that ufologists would come to understand and know a lot about the phenomenon they were trying to study if they would study the jinn, because the jinn were heavily involved in it. Creighton's writings, going back to the late 70s, corroborate everything that I have found about them in terms of what I see in their overlap to the ET field. Nobody paid any attention to him. And in fact, when I went around to, because I went back to the abduction literature, I thought, well, if the jinn, shadow people are involved in abductions, and if the shadow people are jinn, then the jinn are involved in abductions. And if this is true, the evidence will already be in writing. So I went back into my library, which is rather extensive, and I started going through just the major books, like Hopkins and Jacobs and Turner, Rogo, Druffel, Strieber, about cases and experiences. And shadow people are all over the place. They're like stones on a beach.
Right.
But did anyone bother to ask why they were there? No.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
That's an interesting connection.
That is a great connection. And I want to ask you about this because I remember doing a show, and this is just kind of tying into the vampire. Every one of these myths come from somewhere. Like the vampires, they Vlad the Impaler. So, do you think people in history, when we talk about like Vlad the Impaler, at least that's where we think the vampire myth came from? Do you think that they were human beings, or do you think they may have been a hybrid, or do you think could you kind of touch on the vampire, at least that portion of it, where you think that the myth or they came from?
Well, let's look at Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean, because that's where we here in the West get most of our beliefs from. And vampires are around the world. My favorites, by the way, come from the Andes in Peru. They're fat vampires. They don't want your blood, they want your fat. The diet vampires. Anyway, getting back to the vampire, the old, going back into pagan times myths had to do a lot with fear of the dead, and that the dead might somehow have the power to leave the grave under certain circumstances. Beliefs that the dead covet life and what the living enjoy go way, way back in time. They were very prominent in Greek mythology. For example, the concept of Hades was an unhappy place, and the dead had no pleasures there. And so if there were only a way for them to come back and once again enjoy food and sex and all the good things that people have, that they would find it. So we have these ancient beliefs. And there are also some associations from other kinds of beings like eclipse demons, in other words, devouring things in nature, that there were forces that would come and devour the good things that could jeopardize life. And so as these beliefs sort of coalesced then, people blamed many things on the returning dead.
Right.
There was a great fear that the dead could jump out of their grave and come back and pester the living. And if they pestered the living, what would they want? More than anything else, they would want sex. And so stories of vampires coming back from the dead usually involve some sort of sexual molestation, not just the taking of blood, which could be physical or not, but it's the life force energy. The dead would need that life force energy. and they would bring pestilence with them as well. So to be a vampire, you really had to be dead.
Right.
And there was none of this, turning thing, like Anne Rice, where you could suck somebody nearly dry and then drink a little bit of their blood.
Right.
Voila, you would live forever and be rich and famous and run around in, French lace. But vampires were horrible. They were ugly. They were like Nosferatu, they were revolting things that were unholy. And according to some beliefs, they had finite lifespans, that if they managed to escape the grave, they would kind of run out of juice like a battery at some point, or they could be dispatched. But Stoker was not the first person to start elaborating on that from a fantasy standpoint, but he was the most influential, because Dracula has never been out of print since 1897, and
Right.
it's probably been read more than the Bible practically. It's well, that's an exaggeration, but I mean it's been out there, and millions and millions of people have read it. Well, like any good writer, Stoker took a little bit of fact and mixed in a lot of fiction, and he knew a little bit about vampire lore and a little bit about Romania. And he started borrowing things. And one of the things he borrowed was the historical figure Vlad Tepes, whose nickname was Dracula, son of the dead. Now, the original title of Stoker's novel was called The Vampire, which is an Eastern European term for vampire. Well, would we be as scared today of the vampire as we are of Dracula? I mean, it's a wimpy sounding name,
Right.
but Dracula just rolled off the tongue, and it was mystery and power. And so he borrowed the historical figure of Vlad Tepes, who was very bloodthirsty, but was not technically a vampire. And some of the scenes that are in Dracula, Stoker never went to Romania. The Borgo Pass, where the Count's castle was, he used descriptions from the Swiss Alps for that. The real Borgo Pass in Romania is kind of a little hill that's very pastoral with a lot of cows on it.
Right.
So it goes. Vampires casting no reflection in mirrors. That was another fiction he introduced based on shadows not having a soul, and so a soul would have no reflection. Garlic, it's true, is an old remedy against vampires. Vampires having to sleep in their native earth, another total fiction. And so these things then become absorbed in pop culture, and they become part of the fabric of general belief about vampires.
Yeah, I've always found them fascinating. I love, if it's a good, movie, it's always, there's nothing like a good vampire movie. Well, unfortunately, our time has flown by, and you're going to have to come back again, because we love you. We love your research, and I'm sure you'll have probably about 20 books by the end of this year. So we'll have more to talk about. But will you come back and see us again?
I would love to, and maybe I can arrange the video next time.
Yes, we would love that.
I will probably be out in Los Angeles sometime this year. So
Well, when you're here,
Better yet, just come on by.
yeah, just come into the studio. That would even be better.
Well, I've enjoyed talking with you tonight. I've always had a great time on the show.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And everybody, now your website is visionaryliving.com.
visionaryliving.com. And
Perfect.
I just want to briefly mention new book coming out in June called The Road to Strange: Travel Tales of the Paranormal and Beyond. True stories, weird things that happen to people when they go on trips.
Well, it's about time you got another book out. I mean, it's
know.
been 15, 20 minutes. I mean, Jesus.
Well, when does that come out?
It comes out in early June.
Perfect. Well, we will make sure to pick that up. Go to Amazon, go to our website. I'm sure are you in Barnes & Noble and all the bookstores?
It depends. My book is available to bookstores through Amazon and Ingram. But I don't know how well it will be distributed in stores. Actually, most sales are online these days.
Right, which is true. All right. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you. The crowd goes crazy again. And we want to thank Rosemary, Ellen, Guiley for coming again to Truth Be Told. We didn't scare her away the first time. And we hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you do, please go to our YouTube channel. And that's just Truth Be Told TV. Subscribe, leave a comment. You can listen to all of our shows there. Go to truthbetoldwebtv.com. That's our website. Find out all our upcoming guests. You can listen to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Truth Be Told on iHeartRadio. Listen to us there, and we will see you next time on Truth Be Told. I'm Tony Sweet.
And we'll see you in 3 weeks at the Contact in the Desert event, which Tony keeps remembering.
I do.
To
I know.
mention.
3 weeks, Contact in the Desert.
We'll see you then.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye.